You are 7 years old when a grown man screams at you, spitting knives from crooked purple lips. Go home, you effing packy. You are confused because the ethnic slur is inaccurate. You realize too young that races fail geography, but that their epithets and perverted patriotism can still shatter moments of your childhood. You are the last to know that everyone else sees you as other. You keep your eyes on your paper and study and do well and stay quiet and obey. You get patted on the head and told you're one of the good ones. You're a model until you aren't. Because those manners you once minded and that tongue you once bit won't be held back anymore. Can't be. And what they think is rebellion is in truth survival. Because if you stay silent 1 second longer, the anger surging through your blood will engulf you in flames. So you snatch their words from the air, terrorist, raghead, sand nigger, and burn them like kindling and rub the embers onto your skin, a sacrilege, a benediction. For the girl you once were, for the girl you are becoming, the one who doesn't ask to be recognized but demands to be known. The one who presses into her fears to speak out, to stand up, to live. Anything else is death. The one who learns that sometimes the enemy is a smiling neighbor, too ashamed to reveal herself except behind the dark curtain of the ballot box. Sometimes your enemy is a friend. You are tired of fighting for your name and tired of the eternal question, where are you really from? You persist. Because your name is who you are. You weep for a land built on the backs of your black and brown brothers and sisters and soaked in their blood. You claim your joy. You lay your roots, blood and bone, fire and ash. And in this land of the free and the home of the brave, you plant yourself like a flag. A poem by Samira Ahmed. The title of the poem is On Being American, and it's from a collection, Ink Knows No Borders, Poems of the Immigrant and Refugee Experience, that has been published by Seven Stories Press. Good evening. My name is Charles Carr, and welcome to Philly Loves Poetry, a collaborative program from the Moonstone Art Center of Philadelphia and PhillyCam. The focus of our show is to give our audiences, both here and you as viewers, the experience of the rich culture of poetry in the city of Philadelphia. And to understand that in the city of Philadelphia, there are over 50 different organizations that somehow promote the love of poetry, either through having poetry readings each week, which Moonstone does, having special poetry events throughout the year, that run poetry workshops for poets of all ages and all stages of development, and publish books of poems, both chapbooks and full-length and poetry journals. Moonstone itself is a publisher of books of poems. So tonight we have the second in a series of programs this year on Philly Loves Poetry, and which is the title is Generations of Philadelphia Poets. And tonight we really have an extraordinary and excellent guest here to join me for this show, and I think we're really very, very fortunate to have them. To my far right is Octavia McBride-Ahebee. Octavia works presently in human relations with the context of global inequality. Her poetry collections include Assuming Voices, Where My Birthmark Dances, and most recently, Praise Song for the Gravediggers. Octavia's work has appeared in numerous journals and anthologies, including Rigorous, For Harriet, Raising Lily Ledbetter, Women Poets Occupy the Workplace, Yellow Medicine, Batalasha Poetry Exchange, Damazine, a literary journal of the Muslim world, Fingernails Across the Chalkboard, Poetry and Prose for HIV/AIDS from the Black Diaspora, Under Our Skin, Literature of Breast Cancer, Sea Breeze, a journal of contemporary Liberian writing. The Journal of the National Medical Association, Art and Medicine, International Poetry, and Faces of Americas, and the Beloit Poetry Journal. So very welcome.
Thank you.
And next to her is her daughter, Sojourner. Sojourner was born in the Ivory Coast to an American mother and father. Sojourner writes stories about African diaspora identities and the eternal question of home and belonging. Sojourner's poems have been published or are forthcoming in The Atlantic, the Academy of American Poets, Poem a Day, Muzzle Magazine, For Harriet, Winter Tangerine Review, Apiary Magazine, and elsewhere. In 2013, Sojourner served as National Student Poet, the nation's highest honor for young poets presenting original work. Sojourner was invited to the White House by former First Lady Michelle Obama to garner her award. Sojourner is a graduate of Stanford University, where she undertook 4 years of rigorous study within the African American Studies program. Sojourner is a recipient of the McDowell Fellowship, and her debut poetry chapbook, Reporting from the Belly of the Night, was released in August 2017. Sojourner believes that not in the boat that floated her here, but what she'll do with the water. Well, welcome, both of you.
Thank you.
So I really want to start out with a very interesting quote that I picked up from a video that I saw, that you gave, and it was very inspirational. He said, "I don't want to preach, I want to serve," and this is your perspective on poetry. Can you kind of expand on that statement?
Yeah, sure. I guess particularly that particular quote came sort of like from that space of being a national student poet, and part of being a part of that program, I had to take on a year-long service project in which I interacted with various communities throughout the United States via poetry. So whether that was in classrooms, libraries, I even worked with elderly people, particularly Alzheimer's patients, using poetry in memory. So very different kinds of communities. And ultimately, when you're going into many of these communities, poetry isn't often something that people have really encountered outside of really a classroom setting, and it's often not something that people were excited about, particularly because of the way that poetry has just kind of been taught throughout time in classrooms. So for me, it was really important to sort of like disarm poetry and not sort of come in thinking I was offering anyone anything, but really trying to see sort of all the gifts and treasures and stories that people were already carrying in these really particular spaces. And my job was then to sort of like mediate the space and not to tell anyone how they were meant to feel or what they should be writing or how they should be writing, but really just giving them the tools they need to express their voice.
Well, that's exciting. And out of that came a collection of poems?
Not that particular project, but yes, I have currently been working on a new collection of poems, and the one that was released in 2017 was a separate project.
Yeah, it must have been an amazing experience to go to the White House to meet the First Lady.
Yeah, for sure.
Michelle Obama. Tell me about that.
Yeah, for sure. So again, the National Student Poets Program, there's 5 poets, and each poet represents a distinct region of the United States. So at the time, I was going to boarding school in Michigan, so I was considered the Midwest region. And so we were all invited, and we flew into DC. All the festivities kind of coincided with the National Book Festival that was happening. So we had a ceremony there, and then Michelle Obama invited us to the White House for an official pinning ceremony to sort of commemorate the beginning of our service, our year of service. And so she hosted us in the diplomatic room, and she read some of our poems in advance. And
she read some.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah, it was really cool. She's very generous lady. Spent a lot of her time with her talking about the poems, about our year of service, what we were looking forward to, gave us advice. It was a really special moment.
I'll bet you.
Yes.
That's really great.
Yeah.
So Octavia, here you have this wonderful daughter that really doesn't fall far from your grace, but you're a teacher. You teach elementary school, right?
Yes.
And your relationship, to children in poetry, how do you express that? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, well, I teach 3rd grade primarily, and each week we have a poem of the week. So my kids can tell you, Walt Whitman, Rita Dove, Langston Hughes, the gamut. I want poetry when they first meet it to be an exciting experience, because like Sojourner was saying, a lot of time when kids meet poetry, it's not as early as third grade, it's much later, and it's not a pleasant experience. So with a poem, we may act it out, we may illustrate it, there's always a recitation. A lot of times we like to invite poets from our community. Like you said, Philly is so rich, but especially young, dynamic poets,
Right.
so they can see that, poets are amongst them, and that they are indeed poets themselves, so they create as well. So it's just something that is just sort of weaved throughout our classroom curriculum.
So, you're originally from Philadelphia,
I'm from
correct?
Philly, right,
And then
West
you
Philly.
went to the Ivory Coast,
Yes.
and you returned with
Yes.
this wonderful young
Yeah.
lady. So, tell me about your attachment to Philadelphia as a poet.
Well, I mean, I had a phenomenal experience. I'm from Overbrook.
Okay.
And I went to Overbrook Elementary, and anybody who went there during the 70s, they know of a woman named Rose Martin, and a sixth grade teacher, but who had a really huge passion for poetry. And she organized this thing she called the Black Poetry Promarama. So she organized with the teachers within Overbrook Elementary School that each child would learn a series of poems. And then April, we had this big presentation at the Overbrook High School. So if you can imagine like a neighborhood, 200, 250 families, and they're learning poetry, and it was mainly black poets. And so from elementary school, you were aware very much of, of the Langston Hughes and Margaret Walker and Nikki Giovanni. I mean, it just ran the gamut. And so you came through poetry through that. And your parents were so involved. Because I have one poem I had to learn was The Negro Mother by Langston Hughes. And my mother had to help me with that poem. That was a very long poem.
Yeah.
And my mom passed from, she had Alzheimer's. She couldn't recognize us, but in the end, she could still memorize that poem. So I mean, we just appreciate the power of poetry. And I just owe so much to this fabulous woman, Rose Martin, who just infused a whole community, in the early 70s with poetry.
I read when I was, researching both of you, but
Yeah.
an interview you gave where somebody quoted Camus in terms of what Camus had said about the teacher that he felt that was so instrumental in his life. Can you just share that with us?
Yeah. Now, when I taught in the Ivory Coast at the International School of Abidjan, fourth grade, and at the end of the year, a parent gave me a copy of the letter that Camus gave his fourth grade teacher after Camus received the Nobel Prize for Literature. And he said, at that moment, he was thinking of that person who inspired him the most, and that was that elementary teacher. And that parent was just thanking me to say, you had an incredible impact on my child.
But I have to believe there are children who you have taught that are saying the same thing about you.
My kids, though, we're good.
And you told me, but Larry also told me that you used to bring Sojourner when she was whatever
7,
into the
yes.
community of poets
Yeah.
here in Philadelphia.
Right.
And I think that's really wonderful.
And
One of the wonderful things about Moonstone in this event that they do every year called Poetry Inc. I think you've heard of it, which is an anthology that's put together of almost 100 poets and submissions. But there are young people, they get an opportunity to publish in this collection. And young people, when I say young people, middle schoolers, maybe high schoolers, that have not really been heard, but they have the opportunity to come and to read a poem in this series. And I think that that's really what we should be really about, is bringing out these great young voices like the Sojourner and so many others.
Yes.
So, so where do you draw your inspiration? I know your mom has been your inspiration, but in terms of your art and where you are right now with your poetry.
Yeah, definitely. So first and foremost, I think it really began like in my home. You were just saying, my mom was, and my grandmother, there's been like a sort of like a matrilineal kind of like legacy of poetry throughout my family. So my grandmother like sort of was reared on these like Southern poets, and so she memorized many, many poems throughout her lifetime and shared that love of poetry with my mother, who then shared that love with me. So as young as I can remember, I can just recall my mom reading me poems in lieu of bedtime stories. So like Langston Hughes, Maya Angelou, Nikki Giovanni, like those were just like their power and their presence were like always in my home, like sending me to bed. You know, I was rising with them. It was just like there. And then in 2002, when I was still living in the Ivory Coast, I was about like 6 or 7. The Civil War was about to start, and all the American citizens were essentially asked to evacuate. So that's when me and my family relocated back to Philadelphia, which is my mother's hometown. And that's really sort of what started and inspired my poetry practice. I was sort of in this in-between space of trying to figure out what I was and who I was. Was I American? Was I Ivorian? I was, you know, now going to public school like in Philadelphia, and all these sort of like questions started to emerge like from my fellow students about my identity. And some of the questions felt very sort of like hurtful because I wasn't able to really answer them, and there wasn't really a clear answer. And then also sort of that issue of feeling like you didn't belong and being displaced in this very traumatic way of having to, you know, be uprooted and leave without, you know, knowing if you were ever going to go back. And so poetry really became that place where I could kind of address those things and give language to those things that didn't have language anywhere else. And so for me, that was sort of my first, I guess, experience with poetry.
Right. You know, I read something when in some pieces on you, and some things you said about when you were in elementary school, that on dress down day, you know, everybody had their costume or whatever they wanted to wear, called dress down. But you persisted in really coming dressed in, you know, there's a representation of you as a child from Africa.
Right.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, sure. For me, I guess like particularly because like my mother was a really big part of kind of allowing me to remember the Ivorian elements of like my history. So whether that was like the writers that she'd read me, like, or the food that we would eat or that she would prepare in our home, that was something that was like actively preserved like by my mom. And it was something that like I was really proud of and something I really missed once I left Côte d'Ivoire. So when I came to the United States, it was sort of like there was no question that those things had value and that they were things that I loved and things that I then wanted to share with other people. But when you're, you know, a young kid, you know, kids are very kind of like ignorant about those things. And there's particular kinds of stereotypes they have about, you know, Africa is just like one big country and like not this place that is like full of like, you know, 54 plus countries with distinct cultures and languages and that kind of thing. So for me, I didn't realize that that was the perception because I'd always been sort of on the other side of it, living it. So when I was met with that, it was very kind of like hard to deal with. But I think poetry really allowed me to follow that assertion of self and to kind of affirm that value in those things. If that makes sense.
I think that's a very great story, you know, because America has been about the melting pot, and sometimes the melting pot means you have to be like us, you know, whoever the us is. But the really greatness is that when we find out about other people's experience and cultures, I mean, that's the magic of, you know, the country. So for you to do that, I think that's really cool. That's really wonderful, and we need more of that. In fact, and I want to put a little plug, something that Moonstone is doing, that Larry has worked on, Larry Robin. It's called We Are South Philadelphia. And what is going to be a demonstration of all the cultures that now make up South Philadelphia, and Asian, African, you know, traditional things we know, Italians, Polish, Irish, Cambodian, Indonesian, and even some populations we don't know. And next August, there's going to be a coming together for a festival where there's going to be this demonstration, you know, of this is who we are. This is who we are. This is our culture. And I just think that's a great experience in a community, and I think that strengthens the community. I want to
Definitely.
get back to poetry and talk about, your discipline of poetry. Here you are, a teacher, your mother, etc. How do you find time, and what is your discipline as far as your poetry writing?
Well, I think it's important to carve out some time. It's not always the same time, but sometimes, some quiet, private time. Thankfully, Sojourner and I are fortunate that we're in this great space. I was telling you earlier that we moved down to the West Powelton Village area, and we're actually in a space that is just for artists. It's 21 units,
Wow.
and it's just artists, and trying to keep artists in a community that's rapidly gentrifying. So it's a special space. So the physical space, how it's laid out, especially the workspace, really is sort of compelling and inviting for you to create your work. But a lot of times too, I create my work also with my young students. When they're writing, and I ask them, "Can I join you? Can I start out?" Of course, I have to be monitoring them and looking at. But sometimes I say, "Can I have 5 or 10 minutes with you?" And I really value that time, and
Sure.
I'm actively trying to create something. But to give yourself, whether it's weekly, whether it's throughout the week, because we were caregivers of elderly, our parents, my own students. It's not always an exact schedule, but you have to be committed to giving yourself some time to be creative.
Sure.
Right, and to involve yourself. I love the space I'm in, to be around a community of
artists.
writers and other artists where you can share, because that community is so important. That communal aspect.
Yeah, that's true. I
Yeah.
didn't know about that.
Yep.
What is
Yes.
it called? Is it a name? There's a name about it? People can find more out about this?
Yes,
or-
the People's Emergency Center saw a
Okay.
need to keep artists in the community because the rents were rapidly. So they partner with other organizations, and it's a beautiful.
wonderful.
Yeah.
And Sojourner, as far as your discipline and your writing your poems, and do you dedicate specific time, or are there larger times when you say, I'm going to do this?
Yeah.
Tell us about your discipline.
Totally. I'm someone who really loves structure, so I have to have something to keep me accountable. A lot of my sort of serious writing sort of arise when I was in high school and college. I went to a performing arts high school, Interlochen, and I studied creative writing there. So there was a very particular structure around writing. Everyone within the major was in a few workshops. There was an expectation that you were producing work, that you were going to workshop other people's work and turn in revisions. So that was a really kind of transformative experience to have as a young writer, and to begin developing a writing process. And that's something that definitely sort of I followed into my college years, pursued writing in workshops on the college level as well. And now that I'm sort of on the other side, on the postgraduate side, I'm sort of trying to figure out what a writing ritual looks like, especially now that I'm starting to work, and you have other responsibilities.
Right.
So for me, it's been really helpful to dedicate a particular amount of time in a particular time of day to write, and to make sure that I have no other distractions. I personally don't like to have the internet. If possible, I like to write in a notebook, just so I'm not in front of a screen.
Right.
So little things like that help me to stay accountable.
Right. So if I was to ask you right now, kind of the existential predicament, what is kind of bleeding into your poems, you feel right now?
Right now, I feel like I'm really being called by my ancestor, my namesake, Sojourner Truth. For those of you who aren't familiar, Sojourner Truth was an African-American abolitionist from the 19th century, and she had this incredible collection of photo portraits that she had taken of herself throughout her lifetime. And she was illiterate, so she never learned how to read or write. And she was enslaved in the North, which was a very particular kind of an enslaved upbringing that we often don't really think about or consider Black enslaved people in states like New York, which is where she was from. And recently I discovered her photographs, which were called carte de visites, and they essentially democratized this kind of photography. Prior to this mode, everyone not everyone could have photos taken of them for very cheap. But after Carte de Visite, it became very accessible. So people like Sojourner Truth were able to sort of like disseminate their image and their message really easily. And so I'm interested in her photographs and writing towards the photographs because I think that she was doing something with this like visual medium that she wasn't able to do in text because she couldn't write, and people were often either writing over her or writing for her. Her, you know, her biography is mediated, so she's saying it to someone. A lot of things get changed. Her vernacular gets changed. Even her most famous speech is in Southern vernacular, but we now know that that couldn't have been how she sounded because, one, she was born in the North, and her first language was Dutch. So she had a very particular sound that was not what is reflected in the historical document. And so for me, these poems that I'm kind of writing towards and using her photographs to guide me, I'm interested in what she might have wanted to say that she couldn't say.
Well, that's very exciting.
Yeah.
I can't wait to, we see the finished product of this.
Totally.
There was something that I read, and this is kind of different, but it's still the same. I saw a video of a poem that you read called Elegance Refusal. And it was a particular remark that you made about black women, and the statement was use beauty aesthetics to ask the world to see them, recreate the visions of themselves as themselves. Can you kind of expand on that a little bit? Because
Yeah.
it's a very interesting perspective.
Definitely. The poem kind of emerged from many places. At the time, I was like studying abroad in Paris, and I was working with African diasporic people in Paris. I was shooting a mini documentary about sort of like blackness, perceptions of blackness and black identity in Paris. And I came across this Coco Chanel quote that was essentially, "Elegance is refusal." And I was thinking about that in terms of the way that black women and black femmes have used sort of like beauty as a way to sort of embody that kind of refusal, whether that is like through like hair practices or dress, and just seeing the way that like our hair is so much more than just like apparel or beauty, but that it's also sort of like this remnant of like this historical remnant. And I was interested in kind of, I guess, exploring that through that poem, and thinking about the ways that like beauty allows us to like be whole and to be connected to those before us. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Octavia, do you have work that's coming out, or there's a collection that you're working on the present
Well,
time?
yeah, I have a new collection out called Praise Songs for the Grave Diggers, and that's currently out. And I'm excited about.
Can you tell us a little something about that?
Yeah, well, it's kind of like twofold.
Because you're going to read some.
Yeah, I'm going to
for
read
us,
some
so-
a little bit later. But for the longest time, my writing has really been informed by my years in Africa. Even prior to being in the Ivory Coast, I was in the southern part, eastern part. So a lot of my writing was focused on that. But of late, I say in the past 3 or 4 years, I'm writing more frequently about my students and the children of my lives, especially because you see the impact of our political climate on them. And you see it at its rawest state, whether it's a kid worrying about their parent, their immigration status, or we've had a few children from Syria who visited our school for a period of time while a sibling was being cared for at CHOP. But that child was in trauma, you know what I'm saying, and how that manifests, in the classroom. So so more frequently I'm feeling compelled. I still have this like sort of international bent, but but it's at home because it's here.
Yeah.
It's here.
You're kind of out there really at the epicenter of a lot that's happening in urban America, like, statistics I talked to you about that you see now of I was very flabbergasted, the number of students, and I'm talking about high school students and middle school that are homeless in the United States, and how it is really ballooned. But you must face that also
most definitely.
to a certain extent.
Yeah, and our school feeds somewhat from that community. Yeah.
Well, we as I said, we have a limited time.
Yeah.
And I think we could talk. We use this. We go on for a couple hours. But we're also interested in hearing your poems. So we can start with you,
Okay,
Octavia.
all right.
And we have a whole half hour, but 25 minutes to half an hour. So
Okay.
take your time and
All righty.
share your art with us.
Okay. I'm going to start with a newest piece I worked on. They're called Aleppo Runs the Hall. There's always some kids running up and down the hall, being kind of destructive. But I'm always curious. They're not necessarily my students, but I'm always curious, especially these set of boys, like kind of who they were, the rapport they had. They weren't communicating in English. And I was just curious as to why they were behaving the way they were. Aleppo runs the hall. Aleppo now runs a West Philadelphia school hall, an open channel of enameled stone, a gateway to deliverance, a hallway decorated in the celebratory pillage of Indian headdress and black buckled hats in the middle of autumn's bloom. He rams with boyish rage powered by fluorescent lights and airstrikes of cemented erasure through this cancer tale of thanks, to expel in Arabic and newly minted curses Lancaster Avenue bottom style of his own tale of proxy wars, of armed pilgrims, of slain empires, seizing the hand of his newest comrade, a boy, brown and homeless, long destroyed by his city too. They rush the hall in self-destruction because to walk with measure would bring no relief. At the close of one school year, we had the massacre in Charleston, South Carolina. And I had, again, another third grade class, and we were sharing at the end of the year what we would be doing for the summer. And one little girl had shared that she was going to, she would be hiding for the summer. And I thought, wow, I mean, that was pretty kind of profound, because she was really struck by what had happened, particularly in Charleston with the children that were there in that church. She actually said I was going to play dead for the summer, and this is the title, Playing Dead for the Summer. Bashira announced on the last day of school, with the calmness of the perpetually battered, unaware of what blow took her down. She had set aflame her replica of Denmark Vesey's church, made for a third grade school project, made from Marshall's discounted clay, enlivened by the history of her own saliva. She had had daymares wrapped in honeysuckle and lavender, of that little Charleston girl with the same corn-rolled pattern of hair as she, lying on Vesey's church floor, face down, hoisted by her own wits, playing dead to stay alive. Bashira said she would play dead for the summer, hide in the lushness of her grandmother's backyard, gated with bars of rotted wrought iron, and wait with the watermelons and the patty pan squash and sprigs of mint and black-eyed Susans on the lookout for this hunting season to pass. Sojourner was sharing earlier about the reception she initially had received when she would go to school here in her traditional garb, and she spoke several languages, and just the reaction that children had had. And one day she came home kind of frustrated, and I wrote this poem in response to that. It's called Victory Threads. I heard her friends laugh at her, that laugh which is square, that stops at points, never to wonder, only to breathe in base expulsions of incurious air. She had proclaimed in a combined fit of wistfulness and swaggering insolence. She had had combs in Abidjan with names, Akissi, Aou, Abla, Ama, Ajua, who understood the temperament of each day's hair story, who could dress your head while weaving choruses of victory threads in your brain, preparing you to meet the day, haughty and wholly armored. And I remember coming to school one day after Gabby Douglas had came on the scene. You know, it was an event that was televised. And that next Monday, kids were just, you know, doing flips and all kinds of things in the schoolyard. And I was kind of moved by them being moved by Gabby. So this is called A Poem for Gabby. On Monday, the schoolyard swelled with hysterical enterprise spawned by you, limbs long, root-like, a kaleidoscope of browns catapulted by your example, depaved belligerent asphalt. Their mounts and dismounts forged new green belts, 4 inches wide, flanked by spotters of white sage and fennel. These uniformed girls and boys, abandoned in the bottom of the national vault, broke loose, vaulted high into a humid morning, into 180 degrees of protracted splendor. And
Tell me something.
yes.
Have you ever read your poems to your class?
Oh, most definitely.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, my stories were, most definitely. Because I always tell them we are amongst peers with each other.
Okay.
You know, they give
That's
me
wonderful.
feedback, I give them feedback. Yes, most definitely. And I think I'll end with this poem. I'm really concerned about migrations and movements, and I'm curious about why people move and for what reasons. And I'm really incensed that people aren't more enraged about what's happening with these crossings over from North Africa over, you know, crossing the Mediterranean into Europe, and thousands of people are dying. And it's a lot of it's because of colonial policies, U.S. policies, failed policies in these areas that are pushing these people out. Anyway, this poem is called Preparations for the Voyage to Lampedusa. Lampedusa is this Italian island that's the destination for a lot of migrants who are coming. I don't want to call them migrants. I mean, they're people. They're people who are fleeing horrors, and they're crossing through the Sahara Desert, through the forests of the North Africa, and trying to make it crossing the Mediterranean. And here is a woman who is preparing her lover's body for this crossing. I tagged him like a suitcase, and our wedding henna and the indigo of our gods, so salt and sand could not erase him. Using a hand-rolled cone of discarded plastic, I labeled him in Arabic on his forehead with the translated love poems of Rumi. Writing across the arch of each eyebrow, I braided his eyelashes into a wind rose to inform a faltering will where grace blew the hardest. I pierced his ears with Voltaire's call to give ourselves the gift of living well. On the palms of his hands, I rendered in sloppy English the poetry of Lord and Night. Between the nervous Dogon mask that dressed his breast and the hairy lotus flowers that framed a navel I loved to get lost in, I sung in the double swirl of earth's only color, a plea in Italian to be kind. Amid the spiring canals of Sundiata's praise song that ran up and down his legs, front and back, I marked the empty spaces with the tattooed faces of his children and a P.O. box leading back to Kalakani. On his stained fingernails, I wrote our love dreams, you know, a quarter-filled belly of lamb and hibiscus, a muted chest, feces that is thick and whole and free of the world's disdain, a means of stretching our children with ideas. I wrote this in Bambara because it glows in the dark, because it can lift a diminishing resolve from the clutches of a cold night desert, and even dance on death's imminent arrival in the middle of a beautiful sea that will reject him, disguised as a lullaby, to remind him at the moment he's embraced in a wet, frothy death hug, that this failure is not his, it is not his, it belongs to those who will rescue his body. Thank you.
And the title of that book again is?
It's called Praise Song for the Grave Diggers.
Okay, and who is the publisher?
I'm Amazon. I publish,
Okay,
self-publish.
So
Yes.
where can we get a copy?
You,
You're
you
gonna
can get a copy on Amazon.
Amazon.
Yes.
Great,
Yep.
that's fine.
Thank you.
So, Sojourner.
Sure. I think I'm going to read from my collection, Reporting from the Belly of the Night. I'm going to begin with a poem entitled Song of Myself. Before Sojourner Truth escaped enslavement, she was known as Isabella Bumfree, the name given to Sojourner by her master. Sojourner Salil. On days I need my therapist, I want you before you named yourself, your palms the color of a raw peach, you knowing pain. Isabella. In a dream I can see a photograph of me, my face black, blue-lipped, shining like a moon, so many flowers brimming from the top of a vase that must be abundance in the corner. I plant this song of myself inside of me, inside of you. Sojourner Salil. Ain't no song of myself like me in the swimming pool last summer. The water returning me to the beginning, my hair shrunken with the weight of so much water, chlorine, the neighborhood girl's saliva. I wonder who you'd become in water. Isabella. My mouth is water, this body and how it came to be here, water, how I speak a word in Dutch runs off my tongue like water, flooding every other language that may pulse inside of me, my running be riverbed wet with desire. Sojourner Salil. You want America to want you back, and I want a boy who doesn't want me, so desire is always an American thing. I look at your photographs, your face black like my face, meaning you got a pool of what could only be moonlight waiting on your face, and I want you, so I want me. This next piece is called Domi. It came from some of the experiences that I had in Paris, kind of communing with and talking with Afro-French citizens. And this poem is for my friend Dominique. Domi was born in the French countryside. When she smiles, somewhere a window opens, a black woman shines her teeth, a shirtless black boy's back glitters in the sun. Domi is still looking for love. Domi would really like a daughter. Domi's headed to a roof deck bar by the river and has asked me to come. Domi laughs like she still knows her child self. She laughs and I can see the back of her red mouth. She laughs and there's a river in her eyes. Domi says she's a Parisian girl. Domi is also from the white country children who would throw rocks at her. Domi is also from throwing the rock back. Domi is also from the relentless brown of her body. Domi says, let's go dancing, let's go out. Domi says, let's get out of the city, to London maybe. And I think black people must always be leaving, moving. And I think what a wonder we get to choose this time. My last night in Paris were in Montmartre for dinner, and the waiter addresses Domi in English first. So Domi says, non, je parle français, which is to say, you will not speak me out of home. You crossed an ocean so my red mouth could speak a stranger's tongue. And my parents crossed the ocean back, looking for work, after the spilled blood, after my ancestors were born from the belly of a slave ship, so I could be born here, in our country. Domi takes my hand in Parc Bercy, and we walk over a bridge that hangs over a major boulevard. And for a whole minute, it feels like we are walking over all the cars, all the people, two black girls walking over all of France, so graceful like we're not even angry, so graceful like you couldn't catch the river in our eyes. Domi is reborn out of the French countryside. When she laughs, it's for all our ancestors, for all our boat people, for the crack in her face where the white country children threw the rock. When she laughs, it's for the light that seeps into the wound each day. Domi is still looking for love. Domi says, let's go out, let's go dancing, let's get out of the city, to Venus maybe, or Mars. Domi is headed to another planet. This one is called A History. Verse. From the Latin word vertere, to turn, as a plowman would a field. Poem. All them lines on the page look like a ripe black field. Poem. From the Greek word poen, to make, like a slave woman's right black hand made a field today, cotton swelling from the ground, white and disease-like. And today I am dreaming up her body on the phone with the health insurance company, in the waiting room, on my back at the gynecologist as he bends and looks up my gown, because memory is a hole to look into, because in 1845, a white man looked up into a black hole, a black woman's anatomy spread out like a nation, like the evening sky, and he shifted a slave woman's uterus out of place without consent, without promising her no pain, field, a thing grown for consumption. A white uterus swells back into place like honeysuckle. What was black and experiment is now garden, pulsing with snow. This one's for my friend, Shimilure. It's called Ghost.
Who is that again? Your friend?
My friend? Yeah,
Okay.
Shimilure. Yeah, we
Okay.
went to school together. California's first rain in months, and two black girls biking down the wet earth. Shimilure carries "Nuck if you buck" on her tongue the whole ride. Says black people like rap so much because it is release. Sometimes the beat falls from our black mouths like a howl, the pink of our tongues blooming in a dark room where no one thought it would. And how we open a wound and make garden out of it, how we part the sea with our teeth, where an ancestor might have jumped from a ship into, how we do it with language, and the ocean salt stains our words white. Ghost me this way, with our music keeping us closer than the way they packed us on ships, with my mouth perpetually open like a wet rose, songing a scream, with my hair plaited and greased down by grandma's hands, with the magnolia always in bloom like grandma's hands, as she plucked cotton from the root in her youth, or mended a shirt, a wound on my leg, as she turned the steering wheel and drove aimlessly for hours, for all the time women like her were refused mobility. Grandma presses a foot to the gas, and a slave girl comes alive inside of her, trying to move, wanting to be so close to us. And Shimilure's voice is somewhere in that in-between, the lyric cutting itself in half to cut across time like a wet blade, and California turning two black girls into water, our shirts sticking to our backs, so close to us, we want to be so close to us. In there.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have more time, so if you want to read some more, and both of you, feel free to do it. We have enough time, looking at the clock, to be able to read a couple more poems. If you want to.
Okay. Do you want to read some more?
Okay,
Yeah. You can go back. Yeah.
Let's see here. This is a poem that I wrote in honor of Sonia Sanchez, and it was included in Moonstone's honorary collection. It's called "Ode to an Ordained Stutterer" for Sonia Sanchez. Ancestral midwives induced a prolonged, unsparing delivery of your words, of the progeny spawned from the left of your imagination. Words too intrepid to announce themselves into the soft, lumpy arms of prosody. Words too exacting to be unbraided into the lushness of small talk. Seditious words too extravagant to roll with ease off a tongue unless with fighting gloves. These sage femmes saw the feet of your ideas first, toe-tied, luminous, promising a packed kick, holy, and in the wisdom of their birthing protocol, informed by the cravings of warrior girls on the move, without shields and charms, crisscrossing landscapes choked in bereavement. Your words were pulled with delicate intent, so when they arrived to meet the world, clinging to afterbirth and relief and pummeled alliteration, wholly bloomed, your words were ready to take aim. I'll share, this is a poem I wrote in honor of my mom. What remains? Her memory, a soup of evaporating dissidents, had survivors, gentlemen with brogues mouthing all kinds of blues, Yeats and lots of Langston. Sojourner, did you want to share something?
This is the poem Elegance Refusal that we spoke about earlier. After Coco Chanel, Patricia Smith, and my cornrows. 1. Elegance like so much refusal, like my cornrows so tight they should bleed red, but nah. Today I practice grace and swallow Tylenol without water and resist sleeping on the back of my head. Today my hair 6 inches longer than yesterday, and that is refusal. The will to tend a garden out of my head. Today I wrap a headscarf round my braids, and that is refusal. Like beauty is a thing to be preserved in silk. Enslaved women tied their hair up for centuries and lasted. How long will my hair last? How long should I keep it in? 2. Today the black gap in between each braid is a street I drive through in the hood. Me and grandma on the way to the hair salon, speeding in her Lincoln Town car, so elegant, as we pass Mary's Garden and the white folks outside the meth clinic on Fairmount, the bodegas bursting with new language as Dominicans reach for Spanish words to greet black folk, and they, perhaps out of love and perhaps out of habit, grow Spanish tongues and speak the new names back, and the neighborhood becomes a kind of refusal, something to drive through, until we reach Miss Sherry's beauty salon. 3. Miss Cherry spread my child neck across the swan white sink as she washed my hair. Spread it so acute like, so fierce as a cut like. Black girls have memories of water as both grief and the split of the neck bone and the desire to be clean, to leave the hair salon a wholly new thing. And elegance like I got you so confused because I've been through 6 different hairstyles in the last 4 days. Elegance like allow me to rebirth myself with the ease of several packs of Kanekalon, a hot comb's black sizzle, black hands of a woman. Black woman be the only living thing who done reached for me. That perpetual gesture to refuse the world's almost reach. Then it's caving in.
We have enough time for another one, yeah?
Sure. This one is called, excuse me, I'm losing my voice. This one is called Queen Poku. The group that my father is from, he's indigenous to the Ivory Coast, and he's ballet. And there's sort of like this origin story about how the ballet came to be in Cote d'Ivoire. And there's this Queen Poku who was fleeing Ghana with her people, and they had to cross this river. And there's this crocodile that's essentially like, you have to give me your most prized possession if you want to make it out of here, and not essentially be killed by the people you're running away from. And they're throwing all these things into the river, gold, treasures, and it's not working. And suddenly she realizes she has to give up her son. And ballet translates to give me your child. And so it's this sacrifice that she has to make as a mother to be a leader of like her people. So this poem came out of that place. It's called Queen Poku. When Queen Poku fled Ghana, the mouth of the Comoe River opened to say, give me your child. The choice between nation and sun so close you could see the river's rage shining a deep black blue, the color of Poku's womb when her child escaped her. The story goes so many ways. You could say it escapes time. After Queen Poku fed her son to the river, the backs of pink hippopotamus rose for her people to cross. Some say she followed them across the river. Some say she jumped into the water, morphing into a fish woman, breathing water into her son's lungs so he could live a new wet life. In a swimming pool on the other side of the world, Poku wraps her new body around me, calls me the little blue girl, her words full of chlorine and the song of a child's voice. I don't want her name for me, nor the water she bring. I want land black folks tended to for centuries. I want feet. In the hood, I come to the pool to cool off, to undo my hair. I fear the deep end because I ain't tall yet, and my feet slip at the bottom. I tell Poku that water be so much pain for me. She laughs, but there is no sound. A bubble escapes from the back of her throat, floats up into a Philly sky, becomes light, then vanishes.
We have time for one. Can you give us one more? Can we?
Oh, me? Yeah, sure.
It's up to you.
Yeah. Do you want to do one last one?
Okay,
Yeah,
all right.
you should take us off.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, I'll take you off with Oh, gosh. With, how about What We Wish, 19? 5? Okay. Oh, all right, okay.
You're good.
Yep, okay, What We Wish. So if you're talking about naming and how we name things. My husband, in his culture, kids are named after the days of the week, and kids always get a traditional name. It was a big back and forth about what we were going to name Sojourner, but I wanted Sojourner, and that's a story in itself with the family. What We Wish, we decided on Sojourner. Don't confine her to the day of the week or give her the burdens of a childless queen rescued by crocodiles. A goose said names could slide you into a destiny. Choose with abandon then, void with the well wishes of rejected sages, a name for our new baby girl, one that lets her raise herself from denial's pit, free from the weight of having birthed the world. Even against the counsel of tradition and the face of greedy censure, masked and ancient, hungry to consume light, he wanted to take a chance as much for himself as for you, to place you in a basket, swaddled in a name, bound in our faith that you would float into a grand adventure. So we gave you to Isabella, coal black, 6 feet, steaming in her own appetites because she staked a claim on self, hoisted by the gravity of her own cravings to announce her arrival. And that is what we wish for you, a bodacious declaration of self, because armed with this, you can traverse the world in love.
Wow, that's gorgeous.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you very much, Boo.
Oh,
This
thank
has
you.
been
Yes, thank
this
you
is
for
a
having us.
wonderful program, and
Very
this
much
really
so.
shows, the richness and the treasures of the city of Philadelphia, as far as our poets. So everything we talk about, the rich culture, you really exemplify it. I just wanted to ask you, as we're closing, what's next for Sojourner? Where are you? I saw a little sort of something about film. You're interested in film?
Yes, yeah, I'm interested in screenwriting. I'm currently writing a series right now with another friend who's a screenwriter as well.
Wonderful.
Yes, interested
Exciting.
in seeing film. Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you again.
Thank
I want to
you.
say to our audience out there, we show you all the love, how Philly loves poetry. We're just asking you to give us some love back. We do 85 poetry readings a year, and I mentioned an event that Larry is putting together that'll come out in August. We need your support to make that happen. So if you're really interested in making a donation and giving us something, just go to moonstoneartcenterinc.org and show your support for us. Show your support for poetry in the city of Philadelphia. These wonderful poets that we have here, and the effort that is put in to bring this all to you. So I thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you
Also,
so
I
much.
thank the crew from Philly Cam, who always does an outstanding job in making this happening.
Thank you.
Thank
Okay.
you.